Welcome to Bill's Aviation Podcast, where your stories are our stories. I'm a general aviation pilot, aviation writer, airplane builder, avionics developer, test pilot, and general screw-up. All stories feature Joe and his merry band of miscreants. The purpose of these stories is to educate and entertain pilots. If you have a story you'd like to share anonymously, please contact me. Today's story is titled Running Out of Fuel on Final. Joe owned a beautiful Bellanca Super Viking. With its 300 horsepower Lycoming IO 540 engine, it could cruise at speeds as high as 205 miles an hour at 10,000 feet, while burning between 12.5 and 15 gallons per hour of pricey 100 low-lead fuel. The Super Viking could carry 68 gallons of fuel, depending on which options were selected when ordering the plane. The extra fuel was carried in additional tanks, and as you might expect, the more fuel tanks ordered, the more complex the fuel valve setup became. When Joe ordered his Super Viking, he checked the box for the 15-gallon auxiliary fuel tanks, which worked out to an extra hours of flying time. With the extra tankage in Joe's plane, he would flight plan it for 160 miles per hour at 13 gallons per hour, giving him a still air range of around 1,020 miles. On this fateful day, Joe planned a trip from Long Beach, California to St. Louis, Missouri, with a layover in Scottsdale, Arizona, to visit some good friends and enjoy some fine dining. Joe's Super Viking was hung up in maintenance, and his good friend, who is a Bellanca dealer, offered Joe the use of his plane, with the observation that it was exactly the same as Joe's Bellanca. Joe took off, headed for Scottsdale. Based on the distance from Scottsdale to his next stop, Hutchinson, Kansas, Joe thought he would have enough fuel to make the trip, plus an hour's reserve. After having the FBO top off the tanks in the Bellanca, Joe took off for St. Louis. As the trip progressed, Joe realized that the fuel gauge was going down faster than expected, and he started worrying about making it to his destination. There was no more airports along the route, and Joe realized that they were past the point of no return. So he maintained a steady course. As he approached Hutchinson, Kansas, Joe really started to panic, and he asked the controller for radar vectors to the ILS, because he didn't think he had enough fuel to fly the standard ILS approach. As Joe captured the ILS, his engine coughed, sputtered, and then quit from lack of fuel. Joe's thoughts were all over the place. Should he declare an emergency? He was over a plowed field with a row of trees between him and the runway. Should he circle and land there? Was he going to crash his friend's airplane? Should he put the gear and flaps down or leave them up? Lots of different thoughts. It was then Joe remembered something that a CFI did in a simulated engine out situation years before. Joe pointed the nose down, turned on the fuel pump, and pumped the throttle. The engine caught, giving him just enough power to jump over the trees between him and the runway, while simultaneously lowering the landing gear. He then dead-sticked it onto the runway. Joe sheepishly called for the fuel truck, topped off the Bellanca, and taxied to the ramp. Lesson learned: when someone says their airplane is identical to the airplane you're familiar with, ask a few questions about such things as installed equipment and anything else that may seem like a trivial issue, such as total fuel capacity. In Joe's example, the identical plane lacked an extra hour's worth of endurance. Also, as soon as you realize you're in a fuel critical state, talk to the controllers. They might know of a nearby airport you are unaware of. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, please hit the like button and subscribe by clicking on the logo in the lower right of the screen. If you really like what you've heard, please help support this channel and become a Patreon. Part of each donation will go to aviation safety and aviation youth programs. Be sure to check out next week's story about Joe throwing an apple core out the window.